Welcome to another episode of The Learning Equation. I'm your host, Danelle Alvarez, and I am so excited to be here today with Marc Baiocco from Clarkstown Central School District. Welcome, Marc.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
So really excited about your clarity of focus around unleashing future-ready learners. I love that word, unleashing. Tell me a little bit about where that came from and how do you really take that from a paper and pencil, this is our mission, to boots on the ground? What does that look like?
So at first, we were really grappling with some of the ideology behind it. You know, many school districts have in their mission statements that they're producing 21st century learners, those who are ready for college and careers. But really, what does that mean? You know, brass tacks, hard facts, you know, how do we see this play out in the classroom? What is it that parents can expect? What is it that students should expect from their own learning experiences? And we had a number of people who quickly joined in to be part of that thought process. And we brought those people together and started to develop a portrait of a graduate. What we call it here in Clarkstown is a profile of a learner, because we're looking at that K-12 continuum. But really examining, you know, within our mission statement and producing these 21st century learners and making sure that our students are ready for college and careers. What does that really mean in the day and age in which artificial intelligence is just changing exponentially? So we came up with 3 tenets within our Future Ready platform. The first was looking at global competence, and this is something that I could get deeper into, but it was really predicated on the whole notion of what we were already doing, having these relationships and making sure that we had more cultural exploration right in our own classrooms. The second tenet was looking at financial literacy. We know that this is something that students have not only weaknesses in certain cases, but also that they could benefit so much more at an earlier age from. So financial literacy became something that was a real good focus for us. And then lastly, looking at the technology awareness. You know, as I said, as artificial intelligence is changing constantly, so too is social media and other aspects of technology. And it's no longer just a computer on a desk, right? There's so much more to technology awareness than that. So those 3 tenets, cultural competence, cultural competence, financial literacy, and our technology awareness are future ready tenets.
Wonderful. Right along, you know, be still my heart. When we talk about a lot about what the new term is kind of durable skills, those future ready skills, those are great pillars, but what are those skills we want students to walk away from? Because the world has changed. You know, Industrial Revolution and school really set them up for coming to school on time, following the rules. Now we really are looking at those, what you're describing. What does that look like? What are those student success indicators that we really want to see students walking away? Are those durable skills?
You know, I think we've talked a long time about students developing soft skills, the ability to communicate, the ability to problem solve together. But I think it goes beyond that. And, I wouldn't just corner it in the conversation about students either. I think that we need to start to think globally and say our staff members need that mindset shift at times as well, because the traditional learning patterns and the traditional learning experiences that we've had in the past are no longer prevalent, and they're no longer useful or valuable. There's a time and place for them, but in order for them to take over the bulk of education, we need to start thinking differently, and we need to make sure that we're engaging in more problem-based learning and helping our staff to understand, what does that really mean? How do we just jump into this problem-based learning? Because if we don't go in with a plan, then it's not going to be successful in the students' eyes. And they're going to quickly lose interest. So we need to make sure that we're keeping them engaged. So those soft skills are built right in the classroom, and having that level of collaboration and problem solving happens right there in each and every lesson.
You made a point about the adults. I'm a true believer that the adults need to begin to experience something different, because if we want them to do something different with the kids, so I'm a firm believer of the hierarchies need to begin to disappear, and we need to have huddles of co-leading and co-learning. So what are some structures that you have ongoing in your district that you provide those opportunities of real world problem solving and bringing huddles together of numerous people so that you're getting lots of different perspectives?
You know, when I first started teaching 27 years ago, you always heard the expression of the sage on the stage, and now it's the guide on the side. Making sure that the teacher sees themselves as part of the learning experience, as a facilitator of learning, and not just delivering information anymore. So with the age of technology evolving so quickly, what we need to do is start to embrace some of those tools. I use this quote at the opening, and I actually just taught a public policy course to a group of high school students. And I used the CEO of Google's quote, where it basically said that AI is not going to replace humans, but humans with AI will replace humans without. So people need to understand that, whether it be the teacher, whether it be the teaching assistant in the room, the clerical staff, our support staff throughout the school, or the students themselves, everybody needs to understand that we need to live harmoniously, and we need to embrace technology, because this is going to be the driver of the future. And when we have the CEO of Google reminding us of that, we have to listen, and we have to make sure that we're taking warning and getting students prepared for the future, and not just saying it in a mission statement.
I see oftentimes we talk about AI literacy. I want it to be termed AI fluency. Like, yes. Here's our challenge. What AI tool is going to best support that, rather than literacy to me is here's the tool. Let me teach you all about it. I want students to be able to choose the tool based on whatever challenge they have. What are currently, how do you as a superintendent or as a district decide which AI to allow, purchase for teachers? How did that come about? Where are you in that process?
Well, we're very much advanced in the process. When I talk to other school districts and where they are and compare ourselves to where we are, I think we're pretty advanced in terms of a school district. The choice of AI and what platforms to use and which ones to put on all of our school-owned devices and what we're giving access to is really something that needs to be made cautiously. We need to make sure that the security is in place, that we're not, giving out any personal identifiable information. In New York State, we have to operate under education law, Section 2D, which requires that we have data privacy agreements in place. So it's not just about jumping into the latest and greatest, because there are probably better platforms out there than what we're using. But we're using them because we have that sense of security that our student data is not going to get into, the dark space. So these are things that are really front and center for us. They're priorities, ensuring that those data privacy agreements are reviewed. They're reviewed by our legal counsel, and that they're really up to muster to make sure that no student's data is going to be at risk. And we know that happens from time to time, but that's something that's really important for us. Furthermore, we want to make sure that it's something that both the students and staff can use. Again, we need to have that symbiotic relationship. If we have a platform just for teachers, and we have a platform just for students, well, we're not going to really see that intersect well in the classroom. So making sure that the program we selected is on everybody's computer, that they have access to it, and more importantly, that the teachers receive the professional development to help the students deliver on their workload. So those are things that, we really thought very strategically about how not only we were going to choose the right platform, but also the rollout of that platform.
Right. What you often see the rollout is whether or not it becomes sustainable, and that continuous improvement. I've heard you talk numerous times about how do you have those pause moments to say, how'd that go? Right? What went well? What didn't? What are the challenges? How do you create a feedback loop where you're getting information coming up rather than just coming down? Because I do find often in districts, information PDs happen, but then how do you then get information from the boots on the ground, from the students, from the teachers of what's working, what's not, what the challenges are, so that you can refine or pivot?
Yeah, we made some changes this year in particular to literacy. We sort of had the process in place for mathematics. The thing that we did was we really started to systematize instructional coaching. So those instructional coaches are the ones that are pushing in. They don't have teaching responsibilities, so they're doing professional development. They're also running data teams. They're getting feedback from the teachers as to what's working, what's not working. They bring those back to our assistant superintendents, who then bring it back to me. And we constantly have the schools being the driver of the continuous improvement. We use a continuous improvement model, a plan, do, study, act cycle. So that cycle will assess where we are, how well the program's working. What's working really well, we systematize, and what is not working well, we decide that we're going to re-examine that at a later point.
You talk some about curriculum alignment and common formative assessments to be sure that it's equitable education. So as a new teacher, math is my heart and soul. If I showed up and said, I'm teaching math in your district, what would you give me as far as support or guidance as like my North Star of what is it I'm supposed to be sure to cover, teach? Back in the day, I was handed my textbook and the keys, like, here's your TE and here's your keys. Good luck. What does that look like in your district?
So we're actually very happy. One of our instructional coaches in mathematics in particular was nationally recognized this year. She received a prominent award from the White House. So we were very happy to celebrate her throughout this past year because of that recognition. And I say that proudly, but I also say it with the notion that she's coming with a level of experience. She's coming with a level of trust. She's coming with a level of respect. And the staff sees that. So having someone like her being able to sort of get the message across that it's not necessarily about the program that we just purchased, because that's just part of it. Any school district, I think, that just purchases a program and thinks that that's curriculum, the curriculum needs to be developed. It needs to be developed in the district. Those formative assessments need to be developed in district. And more importantly, they need to be used to inform instruction. Otherwise, they're not formative. So that's really important, that that expectation is delivered right at the beginning of the school year. And everybody knows exactly what it is that they're working toward for that aspirational goal. So we all go through strategic planning. You develop SMART goals and things of that sort. But do people really know how they're working towards that common goal? And if not, then we need to regroup at some point in between. Because if we're waiting till, May or June to evaluate how well we've done, it's too late at that point.
Mm. Really, what you're describing is I call of the teachers, for the teachers, by the teachers. Yeah. They have to develop it, right? And then each year visit it. Did it suit our needs? Do we need to tweak it? And then developing those common formative assessments. Oh, sounds wonderful. How do you help create the vision for those that are resistant to change? I've been in education for 30 years, and you run across some that for some reason have become resistant to, I'm not going to do one more thing. I call it the Heisman. They give you the Heisman. Mm-hmm. How do you help some of those change their mindset for those that are just really resistant to whatever it is you're trying to do to help move to the future?
I think the first part of that is really looking at the leader. If I'm not passionate about something and I don't own it, then it's going to be easy for the naysayer to say, why are we going to do this? Why this new program? Whereas when I own the goals and I make them my personal goals and people see that and I communicate it, consistently throughout the school year, I think they're more apt to say, okay, this is something that is more of a shared responsibility and a shared goal. And that is important, but that's easier said than done, right? So now it's really about how do we get down to the implementation stages. Developing that portrait of a learner for us was really instrumental because the district had never gone through necessarily a real formidable strategic planning process. And inviting some of those naysayers to the team. So you want to put the all call out for anybody who wants to come and join this strategic planning team. But you also want to hand select people. You want those people who are the naysayers, who are going to give you some of the feedback that you don't want to hear, because not everything is glorious. We need to confront the brutal facts. So helping to have their voice amplified also gives them validation now, and it puts them in more of a driver's seat. So those are things that I think have been very successful, so that when we come up with that final product, we can go out there through a consensus building strategy and say, this isn't just a straw man, right? We're actually looking at a solid plan here that was developed, and it was developed in a team-based approach, and I can live with and support that. And that starts to get people starting to make the turns. Now, that's not going to happen in every case, you know, and in some cases, it's just setting the expectations and saying, this is a non-negotiable, and we're moving towards these goals. And everybody else is marching towards those goals. But the important thing, going back to the leadership, is that, and I say this to my cabinet all the time, if you think you're a leader and you've turned around and nobody's behind you, you only went for a walk. So we need to make sure that people are behind us, and that we're constantly getting that feedback from them.
Do you have like town halls? How do you call these meetings together to get these diverse stakeholders on a regular basis? Because normally we start the year really good, right? We've communicated our vision, we have on board, but then all of a sudden we get easily distracted. How do you keep that clarity of focus and keep that open communication so that you're hearing it in real time?
Yeah, I know throughout the nation, you know, it varies from school district to school district in terms of size. But for New York, we're a fairly large school district, especially in the Lower Hudson area. We have about 8,000 kids in the district. So trying to get as much buy-in as possible, trying to get as much voice included in our planning process as possible is really challenging. This year, I was able to harness the support of partners in Thought Exchange and start putting out surveys that were going to get more and more voices heard. And that has been very successful. And I think as I was getting that Thought Exchange data, they were actually, and then sharing it with the community, there was actually more buy-in as I was putting more and more of the survey questions out. So that was first and foremost. The second is making sure that people feel heard. So when we created those committees, I wanted to make sure that it wasn't just a district committee, because there was no way I was going to get 8,000 people or 8,000 families represented in one committee. So I created lighthouse teams. We have a district-wide lighthouse team, and then we have school-based lighthouse teams. So we have 14 schools across the district, each having their own lighthouse team, and they're run by the principals. You know, and we do get criticism, just to be transparent, that it's the same voices all the time, but it's the same voices that volunteer to be part of the Parent-Teacher Association. It's the same voices that volunteer to be part of their children's classroom leadership. So I don't know how we change that, but the reality is we're doing a much better job at trying to get as many voices heard as possible.
I think you hit it on the head. All we can do is provide the opportunity. Right. You have to choose to step into the room. And so we can, right? And so, yeah, I love that lighthouse. I love that idea. There's always some structure or system in place that often outside doesn't see that, of how do you keep that going. That's a beautiful thing. You talk about curriculum alignment and common formative assessments, but I know your district does a great deal about these real world competency global experiences. How did that begin? Like at the innovation stage, how do you begin with something so grand? of what you've done as far as global competencies?
It happens organically. I started this experience, believe it or not, right around the pandemic, because we were forced to look at things differently. And in my former district, I was the superintendent there. We used to host these annual cultural celebrations. And I wound up partnering with an organization, One World United and Virtuous, and they had a network of about 200 schools all throughout the world. And when we were trying to do the cultural celebration, we were in pandemic. It was during the lockdown times. We started to find ways that we could sort of harness the power of Zoom and some of these other platforms. And it was at that point that we started reaching out to our friends and neighbors in other parts of the world and saying, how do we come together and have the same type of cultural celebrations? Well, this took off. And it became something that was really organic, it was robust, and it was very impactful for the families that were present. And I started to replicate that now in the classrooms. And as I was working and our partnership was growing with One World, we started looking at how are we going to now have students learning from one another. So we take 4 units of study over the course of a year. All of our third grade students are involved in this. And across all 9 elementary schools, they're learning with their peers in other parts of the world on this 1 unit of study. And then they come together on Zoom, and with all the translation devices and things of that sort now, they're watching this real time as the students are presenting. So if there's a language gap, they're able to see it because of translation devices. And we're harnessing that power, whether it be in artificial intelligence or even some of the platforms that already have those pre-established. And that has been nothing short of amazing. I mean, to watch those classrooms come alive in students. I was just in a class 2 weeks ago where our third graders were learning with a group from Mexico. And just seeing them interact and sharing their cultural stories are really interesting. And that's cultural competence.
Mm-hmm. Oh, right. How do you help other superintendents understand? Because I do find as I get to travel around the United States and around the globe and see systems in place, it seems like at this moment, because of, I hate the term learning loss, but because of learning loss, it seems that all the systems want to get tight. Mm-hmm. No, we got a new adoption, follow with fidelity. And in my mind, that's telling teachers to paint by numbers. They are capable of so much more. So how do you have a balance of the tight and loose of leadership? Because I find right now that is something that a lot of new superintendents are struggling with, is when to be tight, when to be loose, and how do you find that good balance?
Mm-hmm. Well, when we're dealing with learning loss or we're looking at any type of gaps in learning, oftentimes you'll hear, let's go back to the basics. I don't think going back to the basics is necessarily the answer, because I'm not sure that the basics were what were causing any type of academic progression. I think what it really is really, again, harnessing the times, looking at what it is that our students will need to learn, and not looking at things as an existential threat, but instead saying, how are these learning opportunities? Unfortunately, too often we're tied down by state mandates and things of that sort, and looking at state assessments and preparing students for the test. So moving away from that teaching of the test mentality, or teaching to the test, I should say, it is really important that people understand that I have the speed and trust in the work that our teachers are doing. And I'm telling you that you have permission to be creative. You have permission to go out there and say, how could I do the best that I can do? And more importantly, that you could experiment and be wrong at times. But while you're doing that experimentation, you need to make sure that you also have assessments in place so that we know where students are performing. And they're short checklists, right? They're formative assessments. They're those short burst assessments that are giving you feedback to help inform the next day's lesson. And that's the art that we have to continue to build upon.
Right. Are the kids picking up what you're putting down, right? Are you pulse checking to see who's getting it, who's not, who's struggling, who needs extra support? Oh, I love that idea. you talk about continuous improvement and you have some stages. How do you make sure that once it gets down to the what PLC level or the grade level or department, that it just doesn't turn into what I call collaboration? How do you make sure that true collaboration is happening at that level in your district?
So I think a lot of it has to do with our principal leadership, putting the trust in our principal leaders to make sure that they're out there and meeting collaboratively with their staffs. What I see that is most, I think, successful in our schools has been the MTSS strategy. I really love that multi-tiered approach because it's taking all of the elements of things that people were struggling with, whether it be AIS or how to meet students' RTI needs, the PBIS model, and it's putting them all together. Addressing the social, emotional, and academic are sometimes synonymous. So now that the teams are working that way together, and it's bringing in our support teams. So our support staff previously were oftentimes working in silos, so bringing them into the conversation and understanding that they have value in their feedback as to what's happening instructionally with the student. Because while they may not be an instructional leader, they understand that if a student is not right in the social emotional framework, it's going to be really hard for them to be right in the academic. So helping them work together, I think breeds the collaboration, and more importantly, teaching people to be active listeners. So using the whole notion of 7 habits of highly effective people is important. How do you think win-win? How do you begin with the end in mind? But more importantly, how do you seek first to understand than to be understood? Those are really important tenets that people need to learn.
As a middle school principal, I found I was there with the kids in June, and all the kids that had failed the class. But what I found was some failed because of skill. They were lacking in numeracy. Some it was will. Their parents were getting divorced. They didn't care about anything. So that multi-tiered support system is really what they needed, because what they needed was 2 different things, and we tended to lump them together. I find often algebra is the gatekeeper that seems to cause kids to have to retake algebra, or they can't seem to get to college because they can't seem to pass algebra from numerous attempts. How do you support kids at making sure that they're successful through their first in numeracy in general? So math is one thing, but numeracy is really that problem solving, not just concepts and procedures, but real world application. How do you support kids in their numeracy journey in your district?
I love that question, Danelle, because a lot of people don't see mathematics as numeracy. And it's a conversation that I have all the time, that when we talk about reading, we don't just talk about reading as a standalone. We talk about it as a literacy component, right? There's fluency that's built into that. Well, the same holds true with mathematics. It's not just about looking at mathematics in a rote way. It's about looking at numeracy across the board. Do they have the cognitive skills? Are students problem solvers truly? And how are they going through those machinations as they are learning mathematics? So helping people to understand that the aspirational goal is fluency in numeracy and not fluency in mathematics is really critical. So those are some of the things. Before we can begin with that conversation, what we need to have a conversation about is, where are we in terms of alignment? And that's something that we did really a critical look at last year. When I'm dealing with 9 elementary schools, and we're beginning at a very early age in kindergarten, sometimes even pre-kindergarten, how is it that we are teaching mathematics so that we get to that numeracy component or goal? And how are we doing it across the district? So if I go into every classroom, am I seeing some of the same types of learning styles? And for the non-educators, I don't want this to seem like we want everybody lockstep and that they need to be robotic in their approach. There's a freedom to be creative in the classroom, as I was saying earlier, but at the same time, we have to be aligned on that curriculum map. They need to understand what the roadmap looks like for them so that we can all get to the finish point together.
I am wholeheartedly in agreement. The way I describe it is we have to be tight on the what and the why so we can be loose on the how.
Exactly.
But if we're loose on everything, what's happening in this algebra class is totally different than what's happening in this algebra class. So it leaves at least enough room for creativity. We tend to want to be tight on the how. Follow this curriculum. Here's the gradual release model. I taught math for 30 years, and it took me about a week to realize I was selling a commodity to seventh graders that wanted nothing to do with learning pre-algebra.
Right.
Why do I need to learn this? So it was really about bringing in the coupon ads from the grocery store to say, what's a better buy, to help them see the relevance of what they needed to learn in math. And I think it's hard for math teachers. It was hard for me because that's not the way we learned math. That's not the way any of us learned math. So how do you step outside yourself and teach in a way that's not the way you learned? Right. So what does professional development look like for that? You talked about the teacher that, was receiving accolades. How do you help people like me, math educators, people that want to really jump into numeracy? What kind of professional development do you give them in order for them to see that this shift has to happen?
It's not just about celebrating, it's about elevating. It's about taking those master teachers and elevating them to be the professional developers. And I think the hard part in education, particularly in public education, becomes that there's sort of a feeling that if you're a brand new teacher, you can't be a master teacher. And I don't see it that way. And sometimes our brand new teachers, our first, second, third year teachers, are the ones that are coming out with some of the exemplary skills that we could put forward. It's not to say that they're a mastery teacher in all areas. But in particular areas, they offer this level of not only competency, but mastery, and they're able to get it across their students well. So how do we continue to translate that to the rest of the staff and transfer some of that effective practice to everyone else? So elevating those teachers is really important. Having them be able to sort of put forward what it is that they're doing and build on some of their success with their colleagues is really important. And I will tell you, there's a time and place for consultants. But when people start to see that the majority of our professional development is predicated on master teachers in the district, there starts to be a real different feel about how we're treating superintendent conference days or professional learning days. And people become more apt to not only be excited about them, but become active listeners and making sure that they're walking away with some of those problems of practice.
I think the beauty of that is when a teacher in your own school or your own district gets up and shares, what they've said is, I'm open to helping. I'm open to you coming knocking on my door and asking me about number talks or asking me about this activity I just did or how am I making it relevant. And I'm in agreement as a consultant that has gone in and done math trainings or numeracy trainings, I'll come back a month later and they'll have questions about where their implementation didn't go as well as they had hoped. And I'd say, oh, well, what did you do? Oh, nothing. I just was waiting for you to come back. I'm like, no, I said, why didn't you talk to your colleagues? I don't know. But I agree that when the teachers themselves, they are more likely, when we talked about those resistant to change, they are more likely to change watching their own colleagues up explaining and describing their success. So how do you provide that opportunity for them? Because I know sometimes in PLCs, it'll be by grade level or by department. How is it that at a school site where they're getting to share this with like the whole staff, or how do you know about where these little spotlights or data as flashlights are happening? How are you aware of where those celebrations should be taking place?
Well, I try to be out in the buildings as much as possible. I mean, I think that that's really where our work occurs. I try to visit as many schools throughout the day as possible, as my schedule will permit, and ensuring that not only am I just visiting the schools, but I'm getting into classrooms. I think what has become pretty customary and traditional is that people will invite me from time to time. And that I'm seeing increasing each and every year. so that I could be part of those learning experiences. And then making sure I do a weekly update to the community so that whatever I visited that week, I could get out to the community and share some of the cool things I've seen. And there are times where, things happen in our buildings that we're not proud of, and you got to communicate those as well. And I think the communication is really what's key to it all. What I find is that moment, just in that week that I say, oh, I went and saw this lesson, or I was in so-and-so's classroom, all of a sudden now I start getting emails saying, hey, could you highlight some of the work that I did this week? And they're sharing projects with me, which is really cool. And it helps people to understand that we need to continue to find ways to engage students and make sure that, they're being challenged at their level each and every day and each and every lesson.
I love that you're a role model getting out there into classrooms, because of all people, the superintendent has the most excuses for not getting into classrooms, right? You just show up and the world happens. What is your expectation for your building leaders or your principals as far as getting into classrooms and giving feedback that's timely, specific, and inspiring?
The same. I think first off, I'm very fortunate to have a strong cadre of building leaders. But it's so easy to get caught in the nuances of running schools, particularly, I don't want to generalize, but, at the middle level, we see a lot of disciplinary issues coming about. Students will make ill choices from time to time. The problem is that people get too focused on that, and they become myopic that their job is just as a disciplinarian. Whether it be a principal or an assistant principal, we're all instructional leaders. That's what we're here for. And we need to continue to embrace that and make sure that the other stuff doesn't consume our time, because the real important stuff is happening in the classrooms. That's where the learning experience is occurring. And helping people to understand that if you have truly engaging learning experiences, your discipline issues are going to go down. So one begets the other. And really, getting sort of leading by example and getting people into the classrooms is really important for me.
Do you do anything about getting parents into classrooms? Do they have, I've seen some that do like coffee with the principal and then they'll walk schools. Is there anything as far as getting the community walking through classrooms to see what's going on, celebrating?
Yeah. I think a hard part is, we have our coffee hours and things of that sort, but it's trying to find schedules that really meet everybody's needs. Even in, it used to be the 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock mark, but now the spring is here, and who's involved in recreational sports or whatever the case may be. I think people's time is challenged now so much by everything that we're involved in socially. And in order for you to be socially accepted, you almost have to be involved in these things. So understanding that we need to constantly find new ways to outreach to parents. We do have parent leaders that come into the school. I tried to incorporate over the past couple of years where we're getting parents more and more involved in some of the programs that we have. I don't want to call them field trips, because we see our field trips as learning experiences. For instance, we have a partnership with a local farm, and we're bringing farm to education. So getting parents involved in that and helping out at the farm or helping out at the school, depending what lesson is occurring, that's really important. And the more we could promote that, the better off we'll be. And it'll help people flex their schedule as well, so that they don't feel this commitment that they have to come to that one particular program.
Oh, just giving variety. As a mother of 5, I hear you, taking one to football practice, the other to taekwondo. And so my time was always split. So it wasn't that I didn't want to be involved. It was just I had competing priorities constantly. So I love that you're giving a variety. What would you say is the thing you're most proud of that you've implemented over the last few years in your district?
I would say our Future Ready program. I think what we did was we put something tangible in place. But to give you one example out of that is something that is actually developing as we speak. So we have this whole technology awareness platform, and we're starting to look at how do we start to make sure that there are meaningful learning experiences here? How do we do that in a problem-based practice? And making sure that that's engaging for students and that it's meaningful for the greater community. So we have a strategic goal of capacity building. And one of the things that I was always struggling with was, you join the Rotary or you join the Lions Club or you join any of these community-based organizations, and how do you start to get our businesses more into the school? Well, we came up with an idea that we were going to take our technology awareness, our students' knowledge of artificial intelligence, and we're going to bring that out to the community. So I met with the town supervisor and some of the town heads, and we had a conversation about how we'd like to start meeting with some of our small business owners and have our students go into an externship and work there at the end of the school year, teach them about artificial intelligence to better create better efficiency within their businesses. And in turn, our students will learn how to run a business. And that symbiotic relationship could be incredibly impactful. Well, I pitched the idea to the town supervisor. He said, before we start with the businesses, could we do this in the town government? So we actually have an externship that's happening right now as we speak. It's going to be rolled out in a week. We already have about 30 students that are interested, seniors that will be here at district office as well as going into the town, different offices, and working in numerous capacities about bringing efficiency through the world of artificial intelligence.
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited to follow that journey. What are some of the AI tools that you use regularly for workflow? I heard you talking about looking at survey results. I can see how much easier it is as I use my artificial intelligence to look at results and come up with themes and what are the trends, what might next steps be. What are some that you use regularly in your workflow, personally or professionally?
So, ChatGPT, Gemini, they're very good programs. Those are probably the most common. They certainly provide quick answers for you for certain things. But we here in the district have adopted Brisk. It's something that I try to keep abreast of because I know that the students and teachers are using it. So I want to be able to speak the same language. We are also are a Google district, so we are using Coursera to start to expand our AI capabilities. And our students have enrolled. I too have enrolled in some of the Coursera offerings. And what we're trying to do is to understand how to use AI. So I consider myself to be quite fluent until I took my first course. And then I realized that I had so much to learn, and how do you go about the prompts to get the right answers to whatever it is that you're working on. So I'm pretty excited about our convocation as we come up on the new school year, where I could start to deliver some of that to our staff and hopefully bring them into a whole new realm in the world of artificial intelligence. What I say to them is the more the merrier. The more programs you experiment with. I love to hear feedback if there are others out there. But more importantly, that we're keeping apprised of the need for the security piece. That is huge. Making sure that we're constantly in that cyberspace, protecting our students and staff. And that's a priority for us.
I agree wholeheartedly. We have to be very careful. If you had one policy you could change that you think would really make a difference to help education move to a more innovative system, what would the policy you'd want to change?
I think I would look at it at the federal level under the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, where there's this requirement for assessments, benchmark assessments. I think standardized tests have become so, counterproductive to the work we're trying to do. And what happens is people become very myopic and focus primarily on the results. And in turn, we have this sort of social belief that schools aren't doing well now. And I would disagree with that vehemently. I believe schools are doing very well, and I believe we're educating students very well. And I think we could always do better. But when we're looking at the students that we're getting now, they're coming with a whole lot more challenge because society is different than it ever has been. So understanding that we're educating students not just from an academic perspective anymore, but in many cases, schools have become sort of these community hubs where many people go to get their dental support even. They may go for medical support. They certainly go for social emotional support, mental health supports. And those are things that are different than they were 30, 40 years ago in schools. So when we're hyper-focused on these standardized tests, we're missing all of the other things that our schools are doing in making students more well-rounded.
And I hear what you're saying. The place that I struggle a little bit is sometimes when there aren't other systems in place, and I go to districts where like 10% proficiency, sometimes those assessments help calibrate what the floor should be. Because if they don't have anything else in common, so I do see sometimes it can be used as a flashlight. I see it cannot be the end all be all, but in some circumstances, they need something to say, this is where rigor should be because they're teaching 2 and 3 grade levels below. Do you use that data at all to help instruction? Do you give it just out of compliance? Because it's a topic that we're grappling with, I think, more and more now with artificial intelligence is how do we know what kids are actually know or doing if at home, you don't know if they're using AI to help with their assignments. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, we do use it. We use that data all the time, but we use it as a data point. And with any good data, we should be triangulating data. We should be looking at multiple points of data. Formative assessment data, I think, is far more reliable than summative assessment data. And quite frankly, standardized assessment data should only be taken into a small consideration because there are so many variables that impact it. Fortunately, we were not one of the districts that were affected by it, but just this past iteration of state testing, we all moved over to a computer-based testing model. Well, the first 2 days were an absolute abomination. They had server issues, they had network issues all throughout the state. And for us to believe that that doesn't impact the students' results, we'd be sadly mistaken. So, it's really about having those controlled environments, understanding that there are multiple data sets that we could be looking at. I agree with you. I've worked in school districts where we had extreme learning gaps and the proficiency rates were not where they needed to be. But what I also focused on is what were we doing with that individual student? So were we getting them closer to proficiency? Were they moving from, a very low tier to maybe a more middle tier? And were they making progress over the course of the year? And that to me is what's really important. So we have our own internal assessments. I don't want to say that I'm anti-assessment in any way or anti-summative assessment. I think that they play a role, but there are other factors that play roles in that as well. It's not just that one outcome that we're looking at.
It's that importance of multiple measures, right?
Yeah.
You have to have multiple measures. And I love the formative assessment to me is the most important because that's what changes instruction, right? Looking at those formative, but they are just singular data points. And I love the idea of triangulating, between what I see when I walk in the classroom, what I'm seeing on the results, what formative assessment is saying, that real triangulation is what really begins to move. Is there anything I didn't ask about that you really are excited or you would like to share?
No, I'm just excited about the possibilities. I think having this whole strategic plan in place and making sure that it's not just a process that we're going through the strategic planning, but more importantly, that we're doing it in a collaborative way, harnessing some of the new technologies, the new platforms out there, like a Thought Exchange, where you're able to reach a vast number of people. And we have very high participation rates, and communicating it and encouraging people to participate is really important. And we're just really excited about what the future brings for Clarksdale.
Oh, thank you, Marc. I was so thankful just for this conversation.
Thank you.